my privilege to talk to these two great women about work made in the outdoor situation, but also the theme of the festival this year is celebrating women's suffrage and the importance of women in the arts, so we can talk about those topics as well. But if I just introduce them, you might even know them better than I do, if I introduce them for a few lines and then we can get them to talk more about their work and how they got to where they were. Because I think effectively both of you ran away to the circus, which is quite a nice thing. I know, Vicki, you were training as a scientist, as a pharmacologist, and then your next door neighbours just happened to be aerial circus people, and you got addicted to it. And then over a period of time you began to realise, working with other companies, that you didn't feel necessarily that you were represented in the way that you wanted to, and you set up your own circus company, contemporary company, Upswing. Ali has worked for over 30 years in circus. You set up No Fit Circus, Fit State Circus, with a group of like-minded individuals. You worked with them for a long time, producing groundbreaking shows, and you've now gone freelance. You work with them, but with other companies as well.
Yeah.
And you're the same background as me, where I remember in an interview I was reading that you'd started out doing street juggling, and then you began to realise there might be a possibility of making a living this way. And back in the day, at the height of Thatcherism, which was a painful time, there was still the enterprise
allowance, yeah.
Which meant you could actually get
We managed to do that 2 years in a row. Once as a double-hander and then once with all 5 of us.
So in a way, for both of you, it was an organic start, and then obviously there's huge amounts of discipline and training, and you've both been very responsible for training up other people and taking circus sort of out of the big top, while still respecting those traditions, but combining it with things like we're talking about dance theatre, parkour, you know, all sorts of new, you use tech, but also it's still very much a live experience. And you've done work with communities where they, of course, had a lot of audience participation, and then obviously hors d'oeuvre pieces. So maybe we could start with a quick fire round, and then we can open out about the work that moved you, and we can get a bit of your story, both of you. So this is Angus's brilliant questions. Ali, I'll start with you. What's your earliest memory of seeing something outdoors, something that really moved you?
Well, the first time I saw outdoor work was actually Dr. Palfrey's Laughology show at Glastonbury Festival, and I just bunked off my physics O-level, much to the disgrace of my parents, and headed for Glastonbury, and I saw that, and 5 years later we were performing with the precursor to No Fit State Circus at Glastonbury Festival. So my first introduction really was through Glastonbury and the passion I had through music, but got sidelined into seeing interest in weird stuff there and wanting to do it myself.
Brilliant. Vicki, what about you?
I think similar to Ali, like I don't come from a very theatre literate family, so the only theatre I probably would have seen as a young person apart from school trips was outdoor theatre. And I remember when I was a teenager, my friends and I would hop on a train from Woolwich uptown into central London, and we'd often end up in Covent Garden watching the street shows in Covent Garden. There's one particular artist we were all obsessed with, Mark Digby. So, as I said, not a particularly theatre literate family, but I knew instantly there was something really special about this thing that we just stumbled upon. And just having that kind of communal, surprising experience with people that you'd never normally engage with.
I know you said in an interview that once you started to get interested in doing sort of aerial work and circus, because you'd been quite a boffin, everything had been very cerebral, it was amazing for you that A, you could do something in your body, and B, something that was quite hard, that you had to fight to learn, really.
I had to fight to learn. I mean, I had been physical before. I'd done a lot of athletics, but athletics kind of takes you in very, very particular lines. And then, so I had science, I had athletics, and I had art. And circus was the first time that all of those things met and kind of became embodied. And it was the first time I did something that tested me on all fronts, not just in these individual areas in particular moments.
And similarly, I think, you know, at the beginning, it was quite political work that you were doing. It was mass entertainment, and it was fun, and it was colourful, but there was quite a strong agenda there, wasn't there?
Always, yeah. I mean, our work was always political because of the time we were in. So it was, you know, fighting against Thatcher, fighting against miners' strikes, fighting against the Clause 28, the environment stuff happening, I think one of our very early shows, we actually got banned by Hounslow Council for doing a show about the environment. And basically it was like a load of pixies who lived in a wishing well and somebody was dumping chemicals, but apparently that was too politically overt at the time.
Amazing how things have changed.
So, yeah.
All right, second one. Who's been an inspiration in your work? Is there a particular mentor or is there an artist that you follow very strongly?
Well, I think first of all, my first inspiration is the community. I love working with the community and the people that are out there and the skills that they have hidden in their bedrooms that come out when you start to work with them. So most of my life I've been really inspired by the community and what they do. And then the person that's inspired and mentored and helped me the most is Orica Zaz, who also shares that passion about the weird and wonderful things that you can find and do with the community, however diverse and wherever they're from and whichever country they're in. And that's something that's really special to me. So that's the core of anything when I'm thinking about my work, is the people that it's either for or that I'm going to work with to make it.
And in 2013 you took a bit of a sabbatical, didn't you? And went to work with a Nepalese troupe of artists who'd been rescued from being trafficked to work in...
Yeah, so basically they were sold by their families when they were 5 or 6 years old and spent their lives in circus, being beaten to learn circus skills. And the organisation, charity that I was working for, had rescued 350 kids from Indian circuses. Some of them were young enough to go back into mainstream education and others had missed that part of their life and basically were left with circus skills and nothing else. So I went out to start working to see if we could turn this around into something that was more contemporary, modern, and to be able to enable them to make work and be paid to make work. So that's the show I'm touring at the moment.
I was going to say, because you brought it into Europe, didn't you, and gave them a chance to... Yeah.
All going home with big fat wads in their pockets and forgetting that they've got to train because we've got all the sweat.
Oh dear, they learned our definitely habits, yes. What about you, Vicki?
Who's inspired me? Like earlier, I'm inspired by the people that we work with to create what we make. We have a process where we spend a lot of time with people to develop the ideas for the shows that we make. I'm also really inspired by the people within the industry who, I think, I'm inspired by outsiders, people who don't fit into the mainstream but who manage to make a place for themselves and also widen that space for other people. So Maria Shoddy from Extant, I think he's an extraordinary artist. Not only does she create work for indoors, she's made a lot of work for the outdoors, but she's always thinking about how she makes space for other visually impaired artists and how she creates work that communicates to an audience that's not always catered for. I'm inspired by Mimbre. They're a female-led circus company and they've been kind of pushing the agenda of profiling women in circus and on the streets. That sounds wrong, but you know what I mean. Profiling women's place in outdoor arts for, since they started. There's lots of people. There's lots of people probably I should name, but I can't.
I mean, after this period of time, you're quite an establishment figure in the arts. You're a Quill Fellow, but you are still the only female black artistic director in the circus, community. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and I know both of you have always pushed not just the fourth wall, so that people sometimes know that what the processes are to demystify the whole thing, but also very determined to bring in new audiences and make it accessible. And I know you've done a lot of work around sort of disability, and there's a lot of dance companies like Cantico that have done the same thing. And that's obviously been important to you both.
I think kind of going back to your previous question, the fact that I didn't actually really experience the pleasures of theatre or think it was for me until I was well into my 20s, I always find frustrating. I wish I could go back to the younger version of me and kind of go, there's all this out there for you if you just go out and grab it. So I guess a lot of the work that we do is about making sure that doesn't happen to other people.
Yeah. Well, the two women I was interviewing the other day who do these mass participating events like the opening of the Olympic Games, where complete non-dancers learn to dance, and similarly the sort of procession work that Helen Marriage does. They talked a lot about sort of mental health, self-esteem, well-being. It's very good for people, isn't it, to find they can do stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, the way that I think of circus whenever we work with it is that it's a space for people to discover the extraordinary in themselves and in other people. And I think in the society that we're in right now, we need opportunities to really kind of see the best in other human beings.
Well, and also it's interesting because you've both gone on a trajectory from being performers to now being producers and artistic directors, and that's obviously a very exciting thing to do, but it's also as we get older, I mean, as a journalist, God knows, I think ages of going on in the media, that's also important, isn't it, to make sure that it's a multi-generational thing and that women still have a role.
I have to say, I was a bit shocked when you said establishment, because I still feel like
and I feel like I run away from the establishment.
I don't feel... it's interesting, we're working with a lot of younger artists coming through at the moment, but I don't feel that far away from where they are in terms of experience, even though there is so much relearning that we have to do all the time because society is changing really quickly. I really get quite angsty when people put you in a space of expertise, because I feel that actually expertise comes in lots and lots of different directions, and it isn't held by simply sitting at the top.
And what is it like to, give up doing the thing that you were first known to, the sort of physicality? Because I know people like Michael Clark and the Ballet Boys, they have companies now, brilliant companies with dancers, but obviously it's their name over the door, but they're not dancing anymore, very rarely. I mean, is it the sadness in some ways, or is it a slight relief not to have to,
well, to be honest,
juggle in the rain?
No fits, they got much better once the founding members stopped performing. I think we got away with it when we were young, not through training, but through the lack of other companies out there doing it and the sheer enthusiasm that we had, not because we were highly skilled or highly talented. So once we stopped performing and then could shape the work and give opportunities to the younger people that were coming through, then actually that's when No Fit State really started to develop. And my interest in bringing young artists or trainees or members of the community through the programmes so that they could end up as professionals in the shows was a big part of what, my passion for producing became, not because I just wanted to make the shows, but the process.
And the whole experience of these pieces being in the outdoors, so you could have some people who have already signed up to participate, other people who are just standing around with a drink and watching them. What do you think changes about the experience with something like that, rather than in a sort of whiteboard art gallery or in a red velvet theatre?
Well, I mean, outdoors is accessible to everyone for starters. You haven't, and it's a democracy. Basically, you can decide if you want to stay and watch it or not, and that is great for people trying to make work, is to just go out there and try stuff, because if people don't like it there, they're not going to bother to stay around, so they can walk away. And so for me, that's two interesting factors about the outdoors. It's accessible to everyone, and you have to make good work if you want people to actually watch it.
I agree with Ali. I think there's something about the reduced amount of gatekeepers kind of stopping artists doing what they want to do, but also stopping people from reaching the work. We started as an outdoor arts company, and then for a period we made work in theatres. We still continue to make work in theatres because I think that's an important. It's an important space to test out ideas and stretch our artistic practice. But there's something about the transaction of somebody having to pay money to buy a ticket to see your work that changes that relationship in a way that I can't quite articulate yet. And I think there's something about the street where there isn't any transaction involved, people gather around you. I think there's something really special about that. Of course, not spending any money makes it accessible to everybody, but I think there's also something about the democracy of the audience. Nobody has had to spend anything to be there. Everybody's equal, everybody's discovered it, sometimes by accident, sometimes because they've gone to a website or had a leaflet through their door. I think there's something really special about that kind of free and open giving of performance.
Yeah, and I suppose the disruptive element, because Helen Marriage, who does procession, you know, she did a suffragette march the other day, and also the Sultan's Elephant, which is the, sort of the famous one. She said cities are basically set up to work as cities. The traffic has to flow, the trees have to be a certain way, and we all start to think, well, we can't do this.
Yeah.
We're not going to be allowed to in London. She said there's something fantastic about just exploding a rocket in the tarmac in front of the Haymarket or whatever.
Yeah,
So it's good for us to unlearn the rules sometimes as well, isn't it?
absolutely. Just rediscover a space, you know, from a very different perspective.
And what, for both of you, what's your proudest moment of the sort of production that you did outdoors that you felt took you to a different level or really moved the audience?
Well, for me, I think there's two moments that I would say, you know, my proudest moments. One was the Barricade Show, which we toured for 2 years across. It was a French-English collaboration. And our final performance in Angers in September 2012 had 10,000 people in the square around our rig, and I was just like, oh my God, this is so rock and roll, what, you know, how have we created this monster? It was just, you know, so extraordinary that it's like a disbelief that, you know, I could have been part of something that was of that scale with that many people that were watching it. So that was the first one in terms of the audience. And the second one was in Barking, working with the CPP in Barking and bringing open house into their square, into a housing estate that has 1,000 people living there and 900 of them turning out into our square to watch the work over the weekend. So they're continually there, the same 900 people. And we'd been there a week before watching that square, working with the community to insert them into the performance. And nobody had entered that public space apart from to go to Morrison's. And when we left on the Sunday evening, there were families having picnics, there were people playing football, there were people doing parkour on all the structures, and the impact that we as a company over 2 days had had on that public space and their community out, a community that's so diverse, you know, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, African, you know, all sorts of people all out playing and eating and celebrating together, and I really hope that that has continued after we went. I know that the following week they all followed us to Stratford and watched us in the Olympic Park do it again.
Yeah.
So a lot of their community left Barking and they were like, this is the first time we've been in London. Even though they're only 20 minutes away on the bus, they actually followed their company and turned up in the Olympic Park, and we're like, we're not embarking, but they were telling everyone, we had this in our housing estate last week. And that was just a beautiful moment.
Yeah, because you get that sense of ownership. And I suppose the ability to transform a space. When I thought that Turbine Hall, sort of artworks that have gone on, particularly the sun, I mean, people were lying on the floor, they were eating sandwiches, they were, you know, that's not how people think they're allowed to behave in the Tate.
Mm.
So it's a really good thing, I think. Okay, Vicki, what about you?
Gosh, I was trying to pick one. I mean, it's always fantastic when you make a piece of work and you're kind of envisaging what it's going to be like, and then it's realised and it becomes what it was always meant to be, but you didn't know it was going to be that when you made it. We made a piece of work a few years ago, Red Shoes, which was with two female performers, and I remember we did some shows in Canary Wharf one summer, and there was this group of little girls that came back and they saw it maybe every single show that we did. Probably about 3 months ago, one of them contacted me because after seeing that piece of work, she's been training, and now she's 18 and she's been training as an aerialist. She wants to come and work with a company, and we're going to be able to bring her in for, you know, for some training and some for an apprenticeship. And it's just fantastic to feel that that piece of work that we made a few years ago, which I was really proud of as a piece of art, has had an impact. Like, hopefully bringing somebody new into the industry.
Because I was watching it online this morning, and it's a very beautiful piece. And I was saying I can see a lot of connections with contemporary dancers as well, but it made me think of something like Angela Carter's Company of Wolves, and that the journey of adolescence that young women go on, and how hard and how beautiful and how complicated it is. And I can see that it would have appealed to teenage girls really strongly. And they get to wear great shoes as well.
Yeah, I think it's female performance on the street, I think, is a really, really powerful thing. And it's finding the right tone that kind of sidesteps stereotypes, but doesn't deny the female experience as we know it. It's a challenge.
Because I know you've talked in interviews about how at the beginning there were a lot of very feminist, radical women's groups, and as circus has become a sort of, so successful in a mass entertainment or movement, really, sort of performance, live performance, it's become not necessarily male dominated, but the men often get more attention, and that is something to keep an eye on, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think it's with any industry where there's a space for community, there's a space for subsidised, and there's a space for commercial. As you move into the more commercial areas, as more money is pumped into it, you tend to see men taking over, which is problematic.
Yeah. But there's also a respectful bit, because I know that when people like Nick Heitner and Katie Mitchell aren't doing theatre, they're out seeing dance and live performance all the time. That's what they do when they actually want to have a nice time and not think about theatre for a bit. So that's a real compliment, I think. And you can see in theatre how they've borrowed many things, or explored, let's put it that way, creatively, a lot of the things they've seen from shows from companies like yours. And I was going to say that one of Angus's questions is, to someone considering working in outdoor arts, what's the best thing? I mean, you're giving a brilliant example there of actually continuity, that somebody can actually become an artist themselves. But you've both talked about living this slightly nomadic life, sort of constantly travelling, constantly living in a communal way. Is it a way of life for you?
I think it has to be, or else you just can't do that kind of work. We were just having a conversation about relationships and how you've got to have them with normal people, because if you have them with another artist and you're both off in 200 different directions all at the same time, it becomes impossible. Yeah. But sorry, go back.
Exactly. There's the joy of the nomadic life, but there are challenges about it as well. But why would you say to somebody, because in a way you both came into it organically, why would you say to somebody it's a career really worth choosing, particularly at the moment when it's very hard for young artists?
It's a tough one right now, because I think we both came into industry in different times, under different circumstances. I know that you had opportunities to, when you could still sign on. And I think
when they hadn't demonised people that didn't want to go through a mainstream career.
Yeah, and when I came into the industry, a lot of the work that I did initially was really commercial, corporate work to sustain being able to be an artist and explore my own practice. And I think there's less of that now, and there's more competition, which makes it a really, really tough, circus in particular makes it a really tough sector for young artists coming in now. And circus is expensive to train, it takes up a lot of your life. When I was training seriously and I was a performer, I was training 5 or 6 times a week for a few hours each day. So it's a big commitment that you make with your body and your headspace and your time and everything. But anyone who is passionate about circus knows that there isn't really a choice. Right? Once you get into it, once you fall in love with it, you've got no choice, you've got to pursue it.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I would say to people coming into the industry is that there is no feeling like it when you are in performance and your work is being seen by people and you're getting to share your skill and your talent. And there is a way to make a living doing it. You have to network, you have to keep developing yourself as an artist filmmaker, but there is a way to make a living at doing it, so don't give up.
Well, in terms of the creative industry's contribution to the economy, I mean, you've both got companies that employ a lot of people. For all that we were being told that this is sort of niche, self-indulgent work or whatever, you were actually, you're major employers in the arts industry.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I would say to Vicki that although we started in the, we had a very hard time, no fit state, persuading, because we were one of the first contemporary companies going in the UK, persuading the Arts Council, persuading people that this was a new type of circus that wasn't in line with the traditionals and was, something that was contemporary and modern and was different and needed funding. And for the first 10 times I put in an Arts Council application, I was told, circus is sport, go to the Sports Council, circus is entertainment. This is not art, you cannot be funded for it, go away. And so, you know, that was the first 10 years of working in No Food State was like that, which is hard. And, you know, I don't know whether young artists now have to put in 10 applications before they get funded or not, but, you know.
I think it's important and valuable to realise, but I do recognise that when I came into the industry, it was just the point where the Arts Council was starting to recognise circus as an art form, and that was really your guys' hard work to get it to that point. And I think, yeah, the positives for young performers coming into the sector now is that there is more recognition for performers, but still not enough. You know, it's the least funded art form of, you know, it gets, I think, about 10% of what dance and theatre does, but it's a really, really fast growing sector.
And it probably, the statistics for audience are much higher.
Yeah, absolutely.
Than those other art forms, you know, for outdoor arts and in general, so. And it's starting to be more balanced.
You've also been trailblazers for, you know, presenting an authentic view of womanhood in the way that you wanted to do. Because I know you've talked about when you first started training, it's a bit like actors. Actors are all small, delicate, slender creatures who, you know, and they look, you know, they're wonderful, but they look the same. I mean, you know, they've got, you know, the same body mass and all the rest of it. And you said you felt very strongly that you didn't look like everybody else, and so you needed to make work that was for you.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the area of circus I started up with a lot of the feminist circus makers were not kind of traditional dainty feminine women at all. It was a company called Exponential and Skinning the Cat. But then when I started to get more work, I started to move into the more commercial areas of circus. I started to find that I did not meet people's physical expectations. Or people tried to put me in a particular box to try and make me look like something that I wasn't. I wasn't comfortable with the way that my identity was being used or manipulated, and I just wanted to take a bit more control.
I know there's a great anecdote in one of the interviews where somebody said, "Be more Grace Jones." You know, like that. We've become the shorthand for how to be a sort of strong woman in front of an audience. I mean, she's amazing, but she's Grace Jones. You know, it had to be like Grace Jones.
I don't have to be anyone else other than Vicki Amedume.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, you know, I just used to like take great pleasure when all the fat ladies in the audience would come up at the end of the show and go, "Wow, it's really amazing to see somebody that's your build doing this stuff, and it's inspired me to go and start learning trumpet training or something." So.
Well, I remember when the chummies and the Fanshaws started out, I mean, most of them, they were contemporary dancers, they had some training, but they were working with like GPs and teachers, and they weren't, you know, sample size by any means. They just looked like a normal, diverse group of people. It was so radical to see that. Michael Clark's performers, and I think he's still got a dancer who's like 49, 50, whatever, Kate, she's amazing. All right, well, shall we open it out to the floor a bit and get some questions, and then if everyone's very shy and retiring, we can carry on chatting, but you probably know more about their work than I do, so who'd like to ask them a question? I know it's very early on Sunday morning to have to do this.
It's not Sunday morning anymore.
Can I ask what you will do? I mean, are you well in the industry yourself, or are you artists, performers, producers?
Yeah, I'm a young performer, emerging artist, and whatever I'm classified as, whatever people tell me that I am, but yeah, I'm a young performer. So it's nice to hear perspectives of times where I wasn't around and what you guys have done for young performers. It's nice to learn from people that have been there before me.
I've got a question. It's a bit broad, but it's I mean, you both have referenced sort of like the status of circus, whether it's with funders or just in general, and we've got to where we've got to, in, as well as in England particularly, but also in the UK. Where do you see circus moving? I'm talking in an outdoor context, where we are. Where do you see that moving to next? I mean, what are the next developments? And are these going to be positive or negative? Bearing in mind the
current conditions.
Without concluding.
Where to start? So I think one of the biggest challenges that we have with the current conditions are the fact that there are fewer and fewer spaces where you can actually create circus work. One of the London-based circus training spaces, which was one that we all use, the Home Arts Trust, closed its doors to rehearsal space recently, and it's now become a circus school because it's the only way that they can sustain themselves. So it's you know, like a circus fitness space now. And there are fewer and fewer spaces across the whole country where you can actually create work. Marry that with the lack of investment in the art form at the moment, or consistent investment, and the lack of a strategic plan for how the sector is going to grow, and it's growing really quickly. There are artists coming out of circus school every year. There's so much talent kind of bubbling under. There isn't, that I'm aware of, a strategic plan within the Arts Council how they're going to support the growth of the sector over the next 10 years. I think that's a really big problem.
What can I add to that? Basically, we've got a lot of challenges, Brexit being one of them. You know, didn't want to start going down that line, but if we end up making work for just UK audiences again and being, you know, contained by our border, then that is going to be have a massive impact on the number of people that can produce and make work. Because there's already you know, the number of festivals that you can play at, and they're not getting any bigger.
Plus, a lot of the way that UK-based performers have been finding to make their work is to kind of segue into Europe for a while to develop the pieces and then bring it back to the UK because there are better support mechanisms over there. So it's going to be really problematic. And again, there hasn't been enough thinking and dialogue about how we're actually going to deal with that and negotiate that. Definitely not in the circus sector.
Is that? Yeah. Some more. Anyone else got any opinions on where it's?
Yes, please.
I have a kind of similar question to that. In like, obviously, you made Barricade and Open House, which were huge productions. And like looking at the funding, the fact that Arts Channel England have no equivalent of Pass and Zeppa anymore, etc. Do you think that that kind of work is even possible in the UK anymore?
I think making large-scale work is really, really challenging in the UK. It took us a long time to make shows of that scale, and we were a leading company, so that if anyone was going to do it, we were going to do it and be involved in those partnerships. But without them, I mean, that Barricade budget was £500,000 plus. Once we sold it another 10 times, it was £750,000 over 2 years. And just to get your hands on that scale of money to be able to make and tour a show is not happening, and won't happen once we're out of Europe, because the only possibilities is through partnerships. And that is what, as a sector, we're going to be severely lacking, is those the partners in Europe, that it's not just financial, it's about space, it's about support, it's about networks, it's about diffusion of your work, and all of that is all just going to close down, and we're going to be, it will be a real challenge for people to make big work. We'll be very limited to the scale.
It's really interesting. I remember in the early years of my outdoor arts career, I started off actually working with Bradley at Greenwich+Docklands Festival, who's another person who inspired and mentored me. But we, the goal of Greenwich+Docklands Festivals is to bring large-scale work to British audiences. And it was really difficult to find large-scale work in the UK because people didn't have the means of production to kind of reach that level. But the challenge is every time they did, the only circuit they had to expose the work to in its first year was all of the large UK festivals. And that's not the right place to be showcasing really fresh work. All the great work that we see from Europe is probably already toured for at least 1 year, probably 2 or 3 years before it arrives on our shore. So it looks magnificent because it's had all of that time to enrich and develop. But our work was only seen at the really big festivals, and it was only seen once.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that several pieces, including Barricade, I mean, obviously look at things like Europe dividing, but also the rise of nationalism, barriers between people, how dangerous it is to start seeing people as other you know, all those borders being down and then walls being erected, literally. They're very prescient in some ways, aren't they?
Well, I mean, you know, Barricade was a show that was so topical at the time, and it was almost like we were making it in advance, because everything that happened in the show kind of happened the summer that we made it. So we were throwing newspapers around, and there was all the Murdoch scandal, and then there was the big riot scene in our show, and then the London riots happened that year, and you know, it was almost like we were predicting and the show was about, you know, barriers and borders and the fear that's instilled by the government, that instills into people that we were, you know, our performers, the story was constantly looking for what this thing is that we're supposed to be afraid of. And actually there isn't anything, but we're just being told all the time that, you know, if you can get over it. So it was it was, you know, a very political piece.
And for both of you, what do you go and see when you're, you know, having a night off, or you need refreshing again, or, you know, I mean, would you go and see that performance? Would you go to art galleries, or what sort of feeds you when you're a bit depleted?
Well,
Telly?
Don't say like
actually, I hardly watch any telly. I like playing games with my friends.
Yeah.
But, you know, I do go to a lot of shows and a lot of theatre, a lot of dance and a lot of outdoor work, just because I love it, you know.
Yeah.
So.
A lot of dance, a lot of music, lots of stand-up comedy.
That's interesting, because actually, yeah, a lot of the sort of the voices within something like Barricades have got connections to stand-up, haven't they, and to sort of using sort of satirical figures like that. And you do use text and storytelling, and I was watching online one of the pieces that you've done for families, where their mums are sort of sitting almost like in a bedroom scenario around with their kids, and that was really charming. It's the power of bedtime stories, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting that when we've moved into theatres and make work for theatre spaces, that I find it really hard to stick with the traditional end-on format. So bedtime stories, I guess, is kind of like inspired by the outdoor experience, where the audience are in the round and they actually become part of the show, which, you know, for me is the best part of the performance. Like the quality of the work that we make on stage is really important, but the quality of the experience and how the audience receive and experience it is also really important. So they all get into bed together and they're in the round, and people start off in their little beds, and each family gets a mattress, and they're all kind of quite, this is my bed. And by the end of the show, everybody's loosened up and spread out. And they're talking to each other, and we have a really hard time getting people out of the theatre at the end of the show.
That's interesting.
And it's great because suddenly the theatre feels like the street again, because that's exactly what happens at outdoor shows. People don't just come watch the show and then politely leave. They sit down, they eat their food, they have a picnic, they talk to people.
Yeah, that's interesting, because obviously going from space to space, you're going to have to adapt the piece according to, or you know, or if it is a very conventional space, you need to. So I saw Seawall this week with Andrew Scott, and originally when he'd done it, he literally shook every member of the audience's hand before he did his monologue, and you can't do that at the Optic.
Yeah.
So you've got to find other ways of disconcerting the audience, really, which makes it very, very fascinating, I think. And what about, what do you see emerging? I mean, obviously circus is huge, as we're saying at the moment, but, you know, from the front, and I'm seeing a lot more sort of pop-up start-ups, you know, sort of young people who are having a go at things because they're not, you know, they've got nothing to lose or whatever, whether it's a shoe company or whether they're starting up some, you know, pub or dance theatre or whatever. Because it's hard times at the moment. But good work emerges from difficult times, doesn't it?
Yeah, also good work emerges when people are supported by
Yes.
to make it.
Yes.
So let's not fall in love with that.
Well, you know, I agree that there is something about, you know, the anarchist spirit of like being an artist, and just there is a drive to do something regardless or not, whether you're funded or not. And that is where the spark of something has to come from. And obviously we all need to live, and we all need to earn, and we all need to make money, and we do need to be funded properly. But without that kind of, you know, passion to do the work and be an artist in the first place, you know, if you're thinking about outdoor arts as a career option because you think that's a shiny new career option, then no. But if you're an artist and you can't help yourself but get out of bed and make work in the morning, then it's the best place to be to do that.
I agree with you on one level, but I think this myth of the artist having to suffer for their work is the thing that keeps people who haven't got any backup plan out of the sector, and it frustrates me hugely. But you know, part of the reason I'm here is because I was really stubborn and I didn't actually see another option for myself other than to continue making work. And I think that's what drives me, is because the ideas have to come out, so I have to find a way to do them. And I see that now with young people coming up. I think we're losing a lot of talent because they don't get their hands on the resources to make the work that they want to make. And what happens is either people who are absolutely 100% committed and compulsive about it stay, or people who have some kind of other support mechanisms they can tap into stay, and everybody else slowly drops away, which is really sad. But there is that kind of whole pop-up mentality, do it yourself. I know a lot of young artists who are kind of finding spaces where they can have parties, and through the parties develop work that they present at those parties, but make money through the bar and whatnot. So people are finding ways through.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is we can't just sit here and rely on people funding us all the time for the rest of it. You know, we have to make choices about how we make our work and where the money comes from. And, you know, sometimes it's funded and sometimes it's like...
Yeah.
There are other creative... First time No Fit State bought a big top was because we blagged all our mates for a £5, crowdfunding in advance of technology, and had a party every year and said, you can give us a £5 now, you can come to our parties for the rest of your life. And it bought us a big top, you know, so there are ways of being...
There are.
If you're committed.
I think we all have to think more entrepreneurially about stuff. Absolutely, I agree with that, and I think funding isn't the default setting. But whilst there is funding available, it should be more broadly accessible to people.
Yeah, when I sit in journalism, there are very few working class kids in journalism now, and it has to be people who can live with the bank of mum and dad. And the others try. I do see them sometimes come in to do work placements, but it's just too hard if you're trying to do 2 shifts of bar work at the same time as, you know, final stories late at night. So we're seeing, so we're hearing very positive things, but, you know, worrying things as well. I suppose it's always been the same. Any more questions for anybody? We're on a slightly tight timetable where they're going to pounce in and move us on quite soon.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that Kathmandu stuff, the things you've done over there.
So what?
Why did you get involved in that?
Yeah, it's an amazing story.
Basically, I was like, I saw the post advertised by the charity that had set up the organisation Circus Kathmandu, and they were looking for somebody to be in Kathmandu permanently because the people that run it, 2 UK artists, one's a filmmaker and one's a circus artist, weren't there on the ground, so they couldn't actually run their project. So they advertised for a volunteer post with some paid expenses to go. And I was at a point in No Fit State where I was going, is this really where I want to be? The company having to commercialise itself to be able to exist, and my work within that organisation being the community and participatory. And I thought, let's go away and have a year to think about this and work on a project. And so in Kathmandu I was bringing different trainers and working with the young people to develop their skills in performance and performing techniques and how to translate their traditional skills into a more contemporary format and selling their work to the market in Nepal and bringing friends over that could perhaps support and influence the work I was doing there. And then brought my friend from Norway there, who runs Circus Sanity, and he paid for he got money from Norway to bring the whole troupe to Norway and the UK to play a show at Glastonbury Festival and in the Circus Village Festival. So at that point we were like, okay, they're now earning their own living in Kathmandu, the Circus Kathmandu guys. They sell shows for the tourists and they do work in their community, and they go and do forum theatre with people in villages to avoid getting trafficked themselves and women's issues and other things. So and I'm touring the show with 2 young artists that will be touring in the UK again in April and May if we get some funding for it.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
And it did promote a sort of personal decision for you, didn't it? You came back and thought, I wouldn't mind being freelance, I can do more of this sort of thing. I mean,
Yeah.
you still work obviously with No Fit State, but
I still do work with No Fit State, you know, occasionally, but I'm sort of, I think they're now struggling to fulfil that part of the community, you know, that was my share, because it was always a co-artistic directorship, and Tom is less interested in the community and participatory work than I am, and that's kind of fallen out a little bit in their work at the moment, which is a shame. But I'm sure they need to just find somebody else that will come and do it for them.
well, thank you very much both of you. It's been fascinating, and I hope everybody's got something out of it. And you know, if you've got any more questions, I'm sure you'll be around to chat to people afterwards. But thank you very much.